Before dawn, when the world was still trapped beneath a blanket of silence and snow, a lone wolf sat outside a small wooden cabin at the edge of the Alpha King's kingdom. The animal did not move. It did not growl. It did not scratch at the door. Between its front paws rested a tiny wolf pup trembling from cold and exhaustion. Inside the cabin, a young woman slowly opened her eyes. The wind howled beyond the walls. The fire had nearly died. Everything felt ordinary. Until she heard the sound. A faint whimper. Weak. Fragile. Almost lost beneath the storm. The woman wrapped herself in a cloak and opened the door. The icy wind immediately rushed inside. And there it was. The wolf. Waiting. Watching. The pup lay helpless in the snow. For a long moment neither human nor wolf moved. Then the woman carefully stepped forward. The wolf lowered its head. Not in aggression. Not in warning. Almost as if it were making a request. Her heart tightened. The pup could barely keep its eyes open. Without hesitation she lifted the tiny creature into her arms. The wolf watched. Only watched. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness. The woman stood frozen at the doorway, watching the animal vanish between the trees. Because this was not the first time. It was the 7th. 7 different wolves. 7 different pups. 7 impossible nights. And she still had no idea why. The woman lived alone near the wilderness where few people willingly settled. Life had never been kind to her. She knew what abandonment felt like. She knew what it meant to be unwanted. Perhaps that was why she could never ignore suffering. The cabin was small. Food was limited. Winter was unforgiving. Yet every orphaned creature that crossed her path somehow found a place near her fire. The 7 pups now sleeping inside proved exactly that. Each had arrived frightened, hungry, alone. And each had arrived carried by one of the Alpha King's wolves. At first she believed it was coincidence. A strange accident. Then another pup arrived. And another. Soon coincidence became mystery. The pups themselves were different. Different markings. Different scents. Different ages. Different origins. But they shared one heartbreaking truth. None of them had parents. Days turned into weeks. The woman spent every waking hour caring for them. Feeding them. Protecting them. Keeping them warm through brutal nights. Slowly the pups began trusting her. The weakest learned to stand. The smallest learned to howl. The frightened learned they no longer had to fear every shadow. And for the first time in years, the cabin felt alive. Yet something continued to trouble her. Whenever a wolf delivered a pup, the animal always appeared exhausted. Some limped. Some carried fresh wounds. Some looked as though they had traveled impossible distances. Every arrival felt less like chance. And more like desperation. Word eventually spread beyond the forest. Travelers began speaking of the woman who lived among wolf pups. Villagers whispered strange theories. Some called her blessed. Others called her cursed. Many believed the wolves served her. Few understood the truth. The wolves were not serving her. They were seeking her. And nobody knew why. The mystery deepened with every snowfall. Then one night everything changed. A violent storm swept across the kingdom. Snow crashed against the cabin walls. The wind screamed through the trees. Even the pups seemed restless. As midnight approached, they suddenly rose together. Ears alert. Bodies tense. Listening. The woman felt her stomach tighten. Something was coming. Minutes later a heavy thud struck outside. She rushed toward the door. The pups followed. When she opened it, her breath caught. A massive wolf stood barely upright. Blood stained its fur. One leg dragged behind it. Its body shook with exhaustion. And hanging gently from its jaws was the smallest pup she had ever seen. The newborn looked impossibly fragile. The wolf carefully placed the pup onto the snow. Then its legs collapsed beneath it. The woman rushed forward. The wolf's eyes met hers. Pain. Fear. Desperation. But something else as well. Trust. As if the animal already knew she would help. The woman picked up the newborn. The tiny creature was barely alive. She carried it inside. When she returned moments later, the wolf still lay where it had fallen. breathing. But barely. The animal had crossed half the kingdom to reach her. Just to save one pup. And suddenly a terrifying question entered her mind. If wolves were risking everything to deliver these orphaned young, what terrible thing was happening deep within the wilderness? The storm continued through the night. But sleep never came. Because for the first time, she stopped asking why the wolves trusted her. And started asking what they were running from. The answer waited somewhere beyond the frozen forest. Hidden. Dangerous. And growing closer with every passing day. The wolves kept returning. And something told her they would not stop until she understood why. Winter slowly tightened its grip across the kingdom. More snow arrived. More storms followed. And despite her growing fears, the wolves continued coming. Another pup appeared 2 weeks later. Then another. The woman began keeping records. Small observations scratched onto worn pieces of parchment. Locations. Markings. Behavior. Anything that might reveal the truth. At first the notes seemed meaningless. Then patterns emerged. The pups were not coming from one region. They were coming from everywhere. Northern forests. Western valleys. Mountain territories. Riverlands. Places separated by hundreds of miles. The realization chilled her more than the winter air. This wasn't a local tragedy. Something was affecting wolves throughout the entire kingdom. She couldn't ignore that. Not anymore. Curiosity became responsibility. Responsibility became determination. The woman started traveling whenever weather allowed. She followed tracks. Examined abandoned dens. Spoke with hunters. Collected every piece of information she could find. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. Entire wolf families had vanished. Not migrated. Not relocated. Vanished. Dens stood empty. Hunting grounds remained untouched. Trails simply ended. And wherever disappearances occurred, orphaned pups eventually appeared at her cabin. The connection was impossible to deny. Yet when she brought her concerns to local authorities, they dismissed her immediately. Wolves die. Nature is harsh. Winter is dangerous. Those were the explanations she received. Simple answers for increasingly complex questions. But she noticed something strange. Every official seemed eager to end the conversation. Too eager. As if asking questions itself was dangerous. Rumors soon began spreading about her instead. People claimed she was exaggerating. Others claimed she trained wolves. Some accused her of inventing stories for attention. The criticism hurt. But not as much as the growing evidence. Because the wolves kept arriving. And every arrival told the same silent story. Something was wrong. One evening a new wolf emerged from the forest. Unlike the others, this one carried scars across its body. Deep scars. Fresh scars. The animal barely remained standing. Its eyes darted constantly toward the darkness behind it. Fear radiated from every movement. Not fear of humans. Fear of something else. Something unseen. The woman accepted the pup. The wolf immediately fled. As though staying even 1 second longer might cost its life. That image haunted her for days. Wolves feared very little. Yet these wolves looked hunted. Not by predators. By something far worse. Far away, stories about the strange caretaker finally reached the Alpha King. Advisors spoke of a woman raising dozens of orphaned pups. Some found it amusing. Others considered it irrelevant. The Alpha King listened but remained unconvinced. Kingdoms faced countless problems. A handful of wolf pups hardly seemed important. Still, the reports lingered in his thoughts. Especially when more arrived. And more. And more. Meanwhile the woman continued searching. Every answer seemed to create new mysteries. Until one freezing night. The night everything became impossible to ignore. She awoke to frantic barking from the older pups. The sound was different. Urgent. Terrified. She rushed outside carrying a lantern. A wolf lay near the cabin. Motionless. Snow gathered across its fur. Between its paws rested another orphaned pup. The woman knelt beside the animal. Its body was still warm. But only barely. The wolf had died reaching her. died delivering its burden, died believing she would protect the pup. The realization shattered something inside her. No creature would sacrifice itself like this without reason. No creature would travel such distances for coincidence. The wolves were sending a message. And now one of them had died making sure she received it. As dawn broke across the snow-covered wilderness, she stared toward the forest. Her fear remained. But something stronger had taken its place. Determination. Whatever truth waited beyond those trees, she would find it. No matter who wanted it hidden. The wolf's death changed everything. Until that night, the woman had been chasing a mystery. Now she was chasing a truth. And truths had a way of making enemies. The winter storms gradually weakened as the season moved forward, but the cold remained relentless across the kingdom. Thick snow still covered the wilderness, burying trails and swallowing landmarks beneath endless fields of white. Yet despite the danger, the woman could no longer remain inside her cabin. Every orphaned pup sleeping beneath her roof felt like a question waiting to be answered. Every scar on the wolves told a story. Every disappearance pointed toward something hidden. Something powerful. Something terrible. She left before dawn one morning, following tracks recently left by a wolf that had delivered another pup only days earlier. The older pups watched from the doorway. Some whined softly, as though they understood where she was going, as though they feared what she might find. The forest stretched endlessly before her. Silent. Ancient. Watching. Hours passed. The deeper she traveled, the stranger the wilderness became. At first nothing appeared unusual. Snow. Trees. Animal tracks. The familiar language of nature. Then she discovered the first abandoned den. The entrance had partially collapsed. Fresh claw marks covered the ground. Signs of struggle remained frozen in the snow. She stepped carefully inside. Her lantern illuminated darkness. The den was empty. Completely empty. No bones. No bodies. No signs of migration. Just absence. A family had once lived here. Now they were gone. The silence felt wrong. Like a sentence missing its final words. She continued onward. By sunset she found a second den. Then a third. Then a fourth. Each one told the same story. Occupied. Thriving. Then suddenly abandoned. Entire wolf families disappearing without explanation. The pattern grew impossible to ignore. And with every discovery, her unease deepened. Because nature rarely erased entire populations without leaving evidence behind. Something was removing them. Something intelligent. Something organized. Several days later she returned home exhausted. The pups rushed toward her immediately. The smallest ones pressed against her legs. The older ones sniffed her clothing. Searching. Waiting. Trusting. Her heart tightened. They had no idea how much danger surrounded them. Or perhaps they understood better than anyone. Weeks passed. The investigation continued. And then the wolves began doing something new. They started guiding her. The first time it happened, she almost missed it. A grey wolf appeared at the edge of the forest shortly after sunrise. It didn't approach the cabin. It didn't bring a pup. Instead it stood motionless. Watching. When she stepped closer, the wolf turned away. Walking slowly. Then stopping. Looking back. Waiting. The behavior felt deliberate. Purposeful. Almost human. Curiosity overcame caution. She followed. The journey lasted hours. Through valleys. Across frozen streams. Deep into territories few humans ever entered. Eventually the wolf stopped beside a rocky hillside. Then disappeared. The woman stood alone. Confused. Until she noticed claw marks scratched into stone. Fresh marks. Dozens of them. Nearby, hidden beneath snow, she discovered remains. Broken fencing. Rusted traps. Tools. Evidence of large-scale activity. Someone had been here. And recently. Her pulse quickened. Why would wolves lead her to this place? The answer became clearer as she searched. Pieces of fur. Bloodstains. Signs of panic. Signs of pursuit. Signs that wolves had not simply vanished. They had been hunted. The realization struck like ice water. Not hunted for food. Not hunted by desperate villagers. Systematically hunted. The scale was impossible to dismiss. And if wolves were disappearing throughout the kingdom, someone was making sure nobody noticed. When she returned to civilization carrying evidence, resistance immediately intensified. Officials dismissed her findings. Merchants laughed at her concerns. Local leaders accused her of imagining conspiracies. The speed of their reactions felt suspicious. Almost rehearsed. As though they already knew what she would discover. As though they feared where her investigation might lead. The woman began noticing changes. People stopped speaking openly around her. Conversations ended when she approached. Doors closed. Whispers followed. The rumors evolved. She was no longer merely strange. Now she was dangerous. Some claimed she manipulated wolves. Others claimed she sought attention. A few insisted she threatened the kingdom's stability. The accusations hurt. But not enough to stop her. Because every night she returned home and saw the pups. Saw the survivors. Saw living proof that something terrible was happening. The wolves themselves continued helping. Whenever she felt lost, another clue appeared. Another guide emerged from the wilderness. Another trail opened. It was as if the entire wolf population had united toward one purpose. Showing her the truth. One evening, as snow drifted gently through the forest, she followed a black wolf farther than ever before. The journey lasted nearly 2 days. When it finally ended, she found herself overlooking a remote valley. At first the location appeared ordinary. Then she saw it. The destruction. Huge sections of forest had been cleared. Trees lay scattered across the ground. Animal habitats had been erased. The land looked wounded. Broken. Stripped of life. Her stomach sank. This wasn't natural. This wasn't accidental. Entire ecosystems had been destroyed. And wolves depended on those ecosystems for survival. Suddenly everything made sense. The disappearances. The orphaned pups. The desperation. Someone wasn't merely hunting wolves. Someone was destroying the world they lived in. The woman stood frozen as realization settled upon her shoulders. The problem was far larger than she imagined. Far larger than a handful of missing animals. Entire regions were being devastated. Entire populations pushed toward collapse. And nobody seemed willing to acknowledge it. The wolves had been trying to tell her this all along. Not through words. Through actions. Through trust. Through sacrifice. She finally understood. The pups weren't random victims. They were survivors of a disaster unfolding across the kingdom. A disaster hidden behind politics, greed, and silence. The discovery should have brought relief. Instead it brought fear. Because truths this large always belonged to powerful people. And powerful people protected their secrets. Days later her fears were confirmed. A group of officials arrived at her cabin. They questioned her activities. Demanded explanations. Suggested she stop traveling into restricted territories. The conversation remained polite. But the threat beneath it was unmistakable. They wanted her to stop. Immediately. The moment they left, she knew she had crossed a line. Someone important had noticed her. Someone nervous. Someone afraid. That realization only strengthened her resolve. The following weeks became a race. She gathered evidence wherever she could. Maps. Records. Witness accounts. Physical proof. Every discovery pointed toward the same conclusion. The destruction wasn't random. Specific regions were targeted. Specific habitats erased. Specific information hidden. The pattern felt deliberate. Calculated. Profitable. Then came the breakthrough. The discovery that changed everything. It happened deep within the mountains. Far beyond the territories most travelers ever reached. A wolf guided her toward an abandoned storage facility concealed among cliffs. The structure looked forgotten. Unused. Yet fresh tracks surrounded it. Her instincts screamed warning. Still, she continued. Inside she found records. Documents. Ledgers. Names. Dates. Locations. Evidence connecting habitat destruction to influential figures throughout the kingdom. Not ordinary hunters. Not isolated criminals. Powerful leaders. Wealthy landowners. People whose decisions shaped entire regions. The woman stared at the documents in disbelief. The conspiracy stretched farther than she imagined. The disappearances weren't accidents. The suffering wasn't unavoidable. Choices had created this tragedy. Human choices. Greedy choices. And now countless wolves were paying the price. For several minutes she simply stood there, overwhelmed. The truth she had chased for months finally lay before her. But instead of satisfaction, she felt dread. Because exposing this information would be dangerous. Very dangerous. The people involved possessed influence, resources, protection. They could destroy reputations, silence witnesses, control narratives. And she was only one woman living in a cabin surrounded by orphaned pups. Fear whispered that she should walk away. That she had done enough. That somebody else could fight this battle. Then she thought about the wolves. The exhausted mothers. The wounded fathers. The pups delivered through storms. The wolf that died at her doorstep. No. She couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything. Not after understanding what those animals had entrusted to her. For the first time since the mystery began, her purpose became completely clear. She wasn't simply caring for abandoned pups anymore. She was protecting an entire future. A future that could disappear if nobody spoke. The journey back felt longer than ever. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound felt dangerous. She knew powerful people would not welcome what she had discovered. And she was right. Because news of her investigation spread quickly. Faster than it should have. Accusations exploded across nearby settlements. Officials publicly questioned her motives. Influential voices mocked her claims. Some insisted she fabricated evidence. Others accused her of manipulating public sympathy through the orphaned pups. The campaign against her intensified daily. Friends grew distant. Supporters became silent. Fear spread faster than truth. Yet something unexpected happened. The wolves responded. Across the kingdom, reports emerged. Wolves behaving strangely. Wolves gathering near villages. Wolves leading travelers toward damaged habitats. Wolves refusing to remain invisible. It was as though the animals themselves sensed the approaching confrontation. And they were no longer willing to hide. Among those hearing these reports was the Alpha King. For months he had listened from a distance. Observing. Questioning. Doubting. But now even he could not ignore what was happening. Too many witnesses. Too many stories. Too many impossible coincidences. The wolves were trying to communicate something. And somehow that lonely caretaker stood at the center of it all. For the first time, the Alpha King decided to investigate personally. Far away, unaware of the king's growing interest, the woman sat beside the fire inside her cabin. Around her slept dozens of wolf pups. Some were nearly grown now. Strong. Healthy. Alive because someone had cared. The sight filled her with both pride and sadness. Because she finally understood the true cost behind every life she had saved. Each pup represented a missing family. A destroyed home. A silent tragedy. The mystery was no longer hidden. The enemy was no longer unknown. The truth had finally emerged from beneath the forest. But exposing it would require a battle unlike anything she had ever faced. And somewhere beyond the darkness, forces far more powerful than wolves were already preparing their response. The storm she had been chasing since the first pup arrived was finally here. And this time, there would be no turning back. The truth should have changed everything. Instead, it changed nothing. At least not at first. The evidence the woman had risked everything to gather was real. The destroyed habitats were real. The missing wolf families were real. The orphaned pups sleeping beneath her roof were living proof of the damage spreading across the kingdom. Yet when the information finally reached those in power, the response was not outrage. It was denial. Cold. Calculated. Relentless denial. The campaign against her began almost immediately. Influential leaders dismissed her claims before they were fully heard. Merchants funded rumors. Officials questioned her credibility. Travelers carried stories designed to make her appear unstable. The woman who had spent months protecting helpless creatures suddenly became the target. The accusations came from every direction. Some claimed she forged evidence. Others insisted she was manipulating emotions through the pups. Many argued she sought influence and recognition. The lies spread faster than the truth ever could. And for the first time since the mystery began, fear truly entered her heart. Not fear for herself. Fear for the wolves. Fear for the pups. Fear that the truth would disappear before anyone listened. Winter slowly loosened its grip as spring approached. Snow melted from rooftops. Streams began flowing again. The forest awakened. But inside the woman's cabin, the atmosphere grew heavier each day. The pups sensed it. Animals always sensed fear. The older wolves became restless. The younger pups stayed close to her. Even the playful ones seemed quieter, as though they understood danger was approaching. One morning she awoke to find several strangers standing outside her property. They did not enter. They simply watched. Their presence alone carried a message. You are being observed. You are being judged. You are being warned. The visitors eventually left. But others followed. Then more. The pressure never stopped. Every day brought new hostility. Every day brought fresh attempts to silence her. And every day she felt the weight growing heavier upon her shoulders. Months earlier she had been alone. Now she was carrying the fate of countless lives. Some nights exhaustion nearly broke her. After caring for dozens of growing wolves, gathering evidence, defending herself from accusations, and fighting against powerful opposition, there seemed little strength left. Yet she continued. Because every time she considered stopping, she remembered the wolf that had died outside her cabin. The animal had crossed impossible distances carrying hope. Hope wrapped in the form of a tiny orphaned pup. How could she abandon that sacrifice? How could she ignore that trust? The answer was simple. She couldn't. But determination did not erase loneliness. And loneliness became her greatest enemy. The kingdom remained divided. Many still doubted her. Many still feared the wolves. Many preferred comfortable lies over painful truths. The woman found herself questioning everything. Was she truly helping? Could one person actually change anything? Or was she only delaying an inevitable tragedy? The questions haunted her. Especially during long nights when sleep refused to come. Then the attacks became personal. Officials arrived carrying orders. They claimed the growing number of wolves posed a threat to public safety. The sanctuary she had built was declared dangerous. Inspections began. Restrictions followed. Suddenly every aspect of her work faced scrutiny. The woman watched helplessly as regulations appeared overnight. Rules designed specifically to weaken her efforts. Rules designed specifically to make caring for the pups impossible. Still she resisted. Still she fought. Still she protected every life she could. Until the day they came for the pups. That morning began quietly. The sun rose above the treetops. Birds sang. The younger wolves played outside the cabin. Everything felt normal. Then riders appeared. Dozens of them. The moment the woman saw their uniforms, her stomach dropped. She already knew why they had come. The riders carried official authority. And official authority rarely asked permission. The lead officer presented documents. Legal orders. Government directives. Cold pieces of paper deciding the fate of living creatures. Several pups would be removed immediately. Transferred elsewhere. Examined. Evaluated. Controlled. The explanations sounded reasonable. But she recognized the truth beneath them. This was punishment. Nothing more. The wolves sensed danger instantly. Growls echoed across the property. The older pups moved protectively around the younger ones. Fear spread through the sanctuary like wildfire. The woman stepped between the officers and the wolves. Not out of defiance. Out of love. These animals were family. She had raised them. Fed them. Protected them. Watched them survive impossible circumstances. Now strangers intended to take them away. One by one the pups were loaded onto transport wagons. The younger ones cried. The older ones resisted. Several attempted to return to her side. Each struggle felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. By sunset the wagons disappeared down the road, taking part of her world with them. Silence settled over the sanctuary. The remaining wolves wandered aimlessly, searching, confused, missing those who had vanished. The woman sat alone beside the fire that night. For the first time since the first orphaned pup arrived at her door, she felt broken. Truly broken. The strength that had carried her through months of struggle finally began to crack. Tears came. Not because she was weak. Because she was exhausted. Exhausted from fighting. Exhausted from defending compassion. Exhausted from watching innocent lives suffer. The room felt emptier than ever. Even surrounded by wolves. Even surrounded by love. The loneliness returned. Stronger than before. And for one terrible moment, she considered giving up. Perhaps the powerful were right. Perhaps she could not win. Perhaps one woman was never meant to challenge an entire system. The thought frightened her. Because it felt believable. Outside, darkness consumed the forest. Inside, despair slowly consumed her hope. Days passed. Then weeks. The pressure continued. More accusations. More criticism. More attempts to undermine everything she had built. The woman stopped traveling. Stopped investigating. Stopped searching for new evidence. Not because she no longer cared. Because she no longer knew whether anything mattered. The wolves noticed. Animals always notice grief. The sanctuary grew quiet. A sadness seemed to settle over everyone living there. Then came the turning point. The moment that changed everything. Far away, within the Alpha King's territory, unusual reports continued arriving. Not about the woman. About the wolves. Royal scouts observed strange behavior spreading across the kingdom. Entire packs appeared coordinated. Purposeful. Focused. Rather than scattering or hiding, wolves repeatedly traveled toward one destination. The woman's sanctuary. The pattern fascinated the Alpha King. Eventually curiosity overcame skepticism. He ordered a deeper investigation. What his people discovered stunned him. Records buried within royal archives revealed something forgotten. Something seemingly insignificant. Years earlier, long before orphaned pups appeared, long before mysteries emerged, a young injured wolf had been found near death during a harsh winter. The animal belonged to one of the kingdom's respected royal bloodlines. Yet somehow it survived. The records mentioned only one unusual detail. A young woman living near the wilderness had cared for the wounded wolf before releasing it back into the forest. The Alpha King stared at the old reports. His pulse quickened. Could it be the same woman? Further investigation confirmed it. The caretaker. The sanctuary. The orphaned pups. Everything connected. Yet the most astonishing revelation came next. The injured wolf she had saved years ago had survived. Not only survived. Thrived. It eventually became one of the most respected leaders among the kingdom's wolves. A wolf known for wisdom, loyalty, influence, and apparently, memory. The Alpha King felt a chill run through him. Slowly the pieces began fitting together. The wolves were not randomly selecting a human. They had chosen someone specific. Someone proven. Someone trusted. Someone who once showed kindness when no reward existed. For months everyone had asked the wrong question. Why were wolves bringing pups to her? The real question was different. Why had they trusted her enough to ask? The answer changed everything. Years ago, one simple act of compassion had created a bond. Not ownership. Not control. Trust. Pure trust. The wolves remembered. And when disaster struck their world, they turned toward the only human they believed would help. Not because she possessed power. Because she possessed kindness. The realization hit the Alpha King harder than any battlefield victory or defeat ever had. While powerful leaders argued. While officials denied. While authorities protected reputations. The wolves had quietly placed their faith in one ordinary woman. And they had been right. She never abandoned them. Not once. The Alpha King immediately traveled to the sanctuary. News of his arrival spread quickly. Fear spread even faster. Many assumed he had come to shut everything down permanently. The woman believed the same. When she saw the royal banners approaching through the trees, her heart sank. Another battle. Another confrontation. Another disappointment. She felt too tired to endure it. Yet when the Alpha King finally stepped from his carriage, something unexpected happened. He looked around. Not at her. At the wolves. At the sanctuary. At the lives she had protected. For several long moments he said nothing. The wolves watched him carefully. He watched them. Then his gaze found the woman. For the first time since this story began, someone truly saw her. Not the rumors. Not the accusations. Not the controversy. Her. The person who had carried this burden alone. The Alpha King had spent months hearing stories. Now he witnessed reality. The exhausted caretaker. The surviving pups. The trust between species. The evidence standing before him. And suddenly the truth became undeniable. The wolves had chosen correctly. Not because she was powerful. Because she was good. The revelation spread quickly through the kingdom. Faster than any rumor before it. The Alpha King publicly announced his support for the investigation. Publicly defended the caretaker. Publicly acknowledged the destruction occurring throughout wolf territories. Shock rippled across every level of society. The people who had spent months attacking her suddenly faced scrutiny themselves. Questions emerged. Doubts surfaced. The walls protecting the conspiracy began cracking. For the woman, however, the greatest victory was not political. It was emotional. For months she had carried unbearable weight alone. For months she had questioned herself. For months she had wondered whether the wolves had placed their trust in the wrong person. Now she finally knew. They had not. The wolves chose her because they remembered kindness. Because they believed kindness mattered. Because even animals understood something many humans had forgotten. Compassion creates bonds stronger than fear. That realization brought tears to her eyes. Not tears of sadness. Tears of relief. The sanctuary remained damaged. The missing pups had not yet returned. The battle was far from over. But hope had finally come back. And hope is powerful. Especially after despair. As the sun set behind the forest that evening, wolves gathered quietly around the sanctuary. Dozens of them. Watching. Waiting. Together. For the first time, the woman truly understood what they had been trying to say all along. They had never brought her pups because they were helpless. They brought them because they trusted her. They weren't delivering burdens. They were delivering hope. And now the entire kingdom was finally beginning to listen. The darkest chapter of the story had ended. The fight for the future was about to begin. And this time, she would not face it alone. For the first time in many months, hope moved through the kingdom faster than fear. Not because the danger had disappeared. Not because the wounds had healed. But because the truth could no longer be buried. The Alpha King's support changed everything. The same voices that had mocked the caretaker now found themselves forced to answer difficult questions. The same officials who dismissed her concerns suddenly faced investigations. The same powerful leaders who had hidden behind influence and wealth discovered that secrets become fragile when exposed to light. Across the kingdom, attention shifted toward the forests. Toward the missing wolves. Toward the destruction that had remained hidden for so long. And at the center of it all stood the woman who had never wanted power. She had only wanted to protect abandoned pups. Yet somehow that simple act of kindness had altered the course of an entire kingdom. The sanctuary remained busy. More wolves arrived. Not carrying pups this time. Simply watching. Observing. Waiting. As if they understood change was finally coming. The woman often stood outside at sunrise, gazing across the forest. For months those woods had felt heavy with mystery. Now they felt heavy with possibility. The battle was not over. But for the first time, victory seemed possible. The Alpha King moved quickly. Investigators traveled throughout affected territories. Destroyed habitats were documented. Corruption was uncovered. Records hidden for years surfaced. Evidence continued appearing from every corner of the kingdom. The deeper officials looked, the more they found. Entire regions had been damaged. Protected lands had been secretly exploited. Wildlife populations had suffered devastating losses. The scale shocked even those who believed the caretaker's claims. No one had imagined the problem was so widespread. No one except the wolves. And perhaps that realization disturbed people most of all. The animals had understood the crisis long before humans did. The kingdom had ignored warning signs. The wolves had not. The Alpha King publicly announced new protections. Forest territories would be restored. Illegal destruction would end. Conservation efforts would begin immediately. Resources were directed toward rebuilding damaged ecosystems. For many citizens, the announcements felt historic. For the caretaker, they felt deeply personal. Because every policy represented lives. Lives she had held in her arms. Lives that had arrived starving, frightened, and alone. Lives that might never have survived without intervention. The kingdom finally saw numbers. She remembered names. And that difference mattered. Weeks passed. Then months. Gradually the effects became visible. New trees were planted. Protected regions expanded. Hunting restrictions strengthened. Wildlife corridors reopened. The forest began healing. Slowly. Painfully. But undeniably. The wolves noticed first. Animals always notice change before humans do. Packs started returning to territories long abandoned. Fresh tracks appeared where none had existed for years. Howls echoed through valleys that had fallen silent. Signs of recovery emerged everywhere. Each one felt like a small miracle. The sanctuary also changed. For the first time since the first pup arrived, new orphaned wolves stopped appearing. At first the woman worried. The silence felt strange. Unnatural. She had grown accustomed to late-night arrivals. To desperate mothers. To exhausted fathers. To tiny paws crossing her threshold. The absence felt almost unsettling. Then she realized what it meant. The wolves no longer needed to bring pups. The crisis was finally easing. One evening she sat outside the cabin watching the sunset. Several grown wolves rested nearby. Animals she had once carried in her arms. Animals who had nearly died. Now they were strong. Healthy. Independent. The sight filled her heart with pride. And sorrow. Because she understood something inevitable was approaching. The wolves would not stay forever. The goal had never been permanent sanctuary. The goal had always been survival. Eventually survival would become freedom. And freedom would require goodbye. The realization hurt more than she expected. Months later, the first departure came. A young wolf stood near the edge of the forest at dawn. The animal had arrived as one of the earliest orphaned pups. Small. Weak. Terrified. Now it stood tall and confident. A creature transformed. The woman approached slowly. The wolf met her gaze. For a moment neither moved. Neither needed to. Some connections exist beyond words. The wolf gently touched its head against her shoulder. Then turned. Walking toward the wilderness. Toward its future. Toward the life it had nearly lost. The woman watched until the trees swallowed its silhouette. Only then did tears appear. Not tears of grief. Tears of fulfillment. Because this was always the dream. Not keeping them. Saving them. The departures continued. One by one. Then pack by pack. The sanctuary gradually grew quieter. Empty spaces appeared where playful chaos once existed. The cabin felt larger. Lonelier. Yet strangely peaceful. Each goodbye carried sadness. But also victory. Every wolf returning to the wild represented success. Proof that compassion had worked. Proof that trust had not been misplaced. Proof that hope had survived. The kingdom noticed these changes as well. Public opinion shifted dramatically. For generations many people viewed wolves through fear. Stories painted them as threats. Predators. Dangers lurking beyond civilization. Now those perceptions began changing. The truth proved more powerful than old myths. Citizens learned about the orphaned pups. The destroyed habitats. The sacrifices wolves had made to protect their young. People began seeing them differently. Not as monsters. Not as enemies. But as living members of a shared world. The transformation spread throughout society. Schools taught new lessons. Communities supported conservation efforts. Fear gradually gave way to understanding. And understanding created respect. The Alpha King often reflected upon that change. Because it revealed something important. Leadership was not merely about authority. It was about listening. For too long the kingdom ignored quiet warnings. For too long important voices remained unheard. The caretaker had taught him that. The wolves had taught him that. And those lessons would shape his reign forever. As years passed, restoration efforts continued. Forests recovered. Animal populations stabilized. Wolf packs expanded once more. The kingdom entered a period of healing. Not perfect healing. Some losses could never be undone. Some families would never return. Some scars would always remain. But healing nonetheless. The caretaker never sought rewards. Never pursued recognition. Never asked for titles. The Alpha King offered many honors. Most she politely declined. Fame held little appeal. Her satisfaction came from elsewhere. From knowing the wolves were safe. From knowing future pups would not suffer the same fate. From knowing kindness had mattered. That was enough. More than enough. Still, people traveled great distances to meet her. Stories about the sanctuary spread beyond the kingdom. Visitors arrived hoping to understand how one woman had earned the trust of an entire species. Many expected some extraordinary answer. Some secret. Some magical explanation. They often left surprised. Because the truth remained beautifully simple. She cared. When others looked away, she cared. When helping became difficult, she cared. When fear encouraged indifference, she cared. Compassion had accomplished what power could not. Years continued passing. The kingdom prospered. The forests flourished. The wolves thrived. And eventually the sanctuary became quiet. Truly quiet. No orphaned pups. No emergency rescues. No desperate arrivals during storms. Only memories. Beautiful memories. The woman grew older. Not old. But older. Enough to recognize how much life had changed. Sometimes she walked through the forest alone. Following familiar trails. Visiting places once scarred by destruction. Everywhere she looked, recovery surrounded her. Young trees stretched toward the sky. Animals moved freely. The wilderness breathed again. Those walks often filled her with gratitude. And occasionally with wonder. Because one question still lingered. Did the wolves remember? Not the tragedy. Not the crisis. Her. Did they remember the woman who opened her door when nobody else would? She never expected an answer. Then one autumn morning, many years after the mystery began, something happened. The day started quietly. Golden leaves drifted through cool air. Sunlight filtered across the forest floor. The woman sat outside her cabin enjoying the peaceful morning. Then movement appeared among the trees. A wolf emerged. Healthy. Strong. Confident. The animal moved without fear. Without hesitation. Straight toward the sanctuary. The woman rose slowly. Her heart quickened. Something felt familiar. The wolf approached closer. Then stopped. And suddenly she recognized it. One of the first pups. One of the earliest survivors. A life she had once believed too fragile to survive. Now standing before her as a magnificent adult. Emotion filled her chest. The wolf studied her quietly. Not as a stranger. As someone remembered. As someone known. The woman smiled. A genuine smile. The kind born from years of memories. Then she noticed movement behind the wolf. Tiny movement. Small shapes emerging from the forest. Pups. Several young pups. Healthy. Curious. Playful. The adult wolf stepped aside. Allowing them to approach. The woman's eyes filled with tears instantly. Not because the pups needed help. They didn't. Not because they were orphaned. They weren't. The family was thriving. Together. safe, whole. The wolf had not returned seeking assistance. It had returned for another reason. To remember. To show her what had become possible. The pups explored the area happily, completely unaware of the significance surrounding their presence. The woman knelt as one cautiously approached. Its tiny nose twitched. Its tail wagged. Life. Pure life. The very thing she had fought to protect. The adult wolf remained nearby. Watching. Trusting. Exactly as wolves had done years ago. The moment felt almost unreal. A perfect circle finally completed. What began with an orphaned pup in the snow ended with a healthy family beneath autumn sunlight. The contrast overwhelmed her. For several hours the wolves remained. Then eventually the family prepared to leave. The pups followed their parent toward the forest. The woman watched quietly. No sadness accompanied this goodbye. Only gratitude. Because this departure represented everything she had hoped for. The wolves no longer needed rescuing. They were living. Thriving. Growing. As the family disappeared among golden trees, the adult wolf paused briefly. Looking back one final time. Their eyes met. And somehow that was enough. No words. No explanations. No grand gestures. Just understanding. Then the wolf vanished. The forest swallowed the family. And silence returned once more. But it was not the same silence that existed at the beginning of the story. The kingdom once lived beneath forced silence. The silence of ignored suffering. Hidden truths. Forgotten lives. This silence was different. This silence carried peace. Healing. Completion. The woman remained outside long after the wolves disappeared. Watching sunlight dance through the trees. Listening to distant birds. Feeling the breeze move gently through the wilderness she had helped save. Her journey had never been about becoming a hero. Heroes seek greatness. She sought compassion. Heroes chase destiny. She answered suffering. Heroes change the world intentionally. She changed it simply by refusing to turn away. The kingdom would remember the investigations. The reforms. The victories. History would record those achievements. But the deeper truth lived elsewhere. It lived in every wolf pack roaming safely through restored forests. It lived in every future litter born beneath protected skies. It lived in every act of kindness inspired by her example. Because compassion has a strange power. It travels farther than anyone expects. It survives longer than anyone imagines. And sometimes, when offered freely, it echoes across generations. Years ago a woman opened her door to a freezing orphaned pup. She could have looked away. She could have chosen convenience. She could have convinced herself it wasn't her responsibility. Instead she chose kindness. That single choice saved a life. That life inspired trust. That trust saved a species. And that species helped transform an entire kingdom. As evening settled across the wilderness, the woman finally rose and returned to her cabin. The forest stood healthy behind her. The future stood healthy before her. And somewhere beyond the trees, wolves howled beneath the fading light. Not cries of desperation. Not warnings of danger. But songs of survival. Songs of family. Songs of hope. The kind of hope that begins with one small act of compassion and never truly ends. The end. Years passed. The crisis that had once threatened the kingdom slowly became history. Children who had been born during those difficult days grew up hearing stories about the caretaker and the wolves. The forests flourished. The rivers ran clear. The mountains echoed once more with the songs of thriving packs. Peace had returned. Or so everyone believed. Yet peace often hides challenges of its own. The caretaker's cabin still stood at the edge of the wilderness. Older now. Weathered by countless winters. Surrounded by tall trees that had grown strong during the years of restoration. Life had become quieter. The frantic nights of caring for orphaned pups were gone. The constant mystery that once consumed every waking thought had faded. For the first time in many years, she lived without fear. Without urgency. Without crisis. Most people would have considered that a blessing. And in many ways, it was. But sometimes, during the quietest evenings, She found herself sitting beside the fire listening to the silence. Not because she missed the danger. Because she missed the purpose. The wolves no longer needed saving. The kingdom no longer needed convincing. Everything she had fought for had finally become reality. Yet a strange emptiness occasionally lingered inside her heart. Not sadness. Not regret. Simply the feeling that an important chapter of life had ended. And she did not yet know what chapter would come next. Outside, autumn winds swept through the forest. Golden leaves danced across familiar trails. The caretaker stepped onto the porch one evening and watched the fading sunlight filter through the trees. A peaceful scene. A beautiful scene. Then she noticed movement. Far beyond the edge of the forest. A wolf. Standing motionless. Watching. Her heart immediately quickened. Not from fear. From recognition. The animal did not approach. Did not leave. Simply stood among the shadows. Waiting. The behavior felt familiar. Painfully familiar. The same behavior she had witnessed years ago when the mystery first began. The caretaker slowly walked forward. The wolf turned. Then disappeared into the forest. A strange feeling settled over her. The wolf had wanted her to follow. Just as others once had. For several moments she remained frozen. Memories flooded back. Questions she thought had long been answered suddenly returned. Why now? Why after all these years? The next morning she entered the wilderness. The forest greeted her like an old friend. The trails remained familiar. The sounds comforting. Yet something felt different. Almost expectant. As if the wilderness itself knew she had returned. Hours passed. Then she found tracks. Fresh wolf tracks. Many of them. Far more than expected. Entire packs had recently traveled through the area. The discovery surprised her. Wolf populations had recovered well. But these numbers seemed unusual. Concentrated. Organized. Purposeful. Curiosity grew. She followed the evidence deeper into the forest. And there she discovered something astonishing. Dozens of wolves had gathered within a remote valley. Not fighting. Not hunting. Gathering. Young wolves. Old wolves. Entire families. Pack leaders. The caretaker had never seen anything like it. The valley felt almost sacred. The animals remained calm. Peaceful. Watching. Waiting. And somehow she understood. This was not an accident. The wolves had assembled for a reason. The same question that once drove the entire story returned. What were they trying to tell her? Days passed as she continued observing. The gathering expanded. More wolves arrived. From distant territories. From regions across the kingdom. The behavior fascinated even experienced trackers. News eventually reached the Alpha King. Now older and wiser, he immediately recognized the significance. Whenever wolves united, there was always a reason. The last time such a thing occurred, it had changed history. Soon investigators arrived. Naturalists arrived. Observers arrived. Everyone wanted answers. Yet none appeared. The wolves remained silent. The mystery deepened. Weeks later, the answer finally emerged. Not through words. Through absence. Several scouting teams reported disturbing discoveries along the kingdom's northern border. Entire sections of wilderness appeared strangely empty. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Empty. Animals were leaving. Birds altered migration patterns. Deer changed routes. Predators abandoned hunting grounds. The behavior spread across multiple species. The reports confused experts. Healthy ecosystems rarely behaved this way. Something was causing widespread disruption. Something approaching from beyond the kingdom's borders. The caretaker listened carefully. A familiar feeling settled in her chest. Years ago the wolves had noticed danger long before humans did. Perhaps history was repeating itself. The possibility unsettled her. Because if the wolves were gathering again, something important was happening. The Alpha King launched investigations immediately. Scouts traveled north. Explorers crossed remote territories. Gradually a picture emerged. The threat was not human. Not political. Not driven by greed. It was environmental. A severe ecological collapse had begun beyond the kingdom's frontier. Massive wildfires. Destroyed habitats. Drought. Starvation. Entire ecosystems were failing. And the consequences were spreading. Animals fled southward seeking survival. The wolves had recognized the danger first. Just as they always did. The revelation transformed concern into urgency. The kingdom had recovered from one crisis. Now another approached. Different. But equally dangerous. The caretaker found herself standing at the center once more. Not because she sought responsibility. Because responsibility found her. The wolves continued gathering. Not asking for rescue. Asking for cooperation. The distinction mattered. Years earlier they had brought orphaned pups. Now they brought warning. The relationship had evolved. Humans and wolves were no longer strangers struggling to understand each other. They were partners facing a shared challenge. That realization filled the caretaker with unexpected pride. Everything she had fought for had led to this moment. Trust. Real trust. Trust strong enough to cross the boundaries between species. The kingdom responded quickly. Lessons learned from the previous crisis proved invaluable. Habitats expanded. Emergency wildlife corridors opened. Resources were mobilized. Communities cooperated. Preparation replaced denial. Action replaced hesitation. Because people finally understood something important. Nature's problems eventually become everyone's problems. Months passed. The situation remained difficult. Yet unlike before, nobody ignored the warnings. Nobody dismissed concerns. Nobody waited until tragedy became unavoidable. The kingdom acted together. And together they succeeded. Wildlife populations adapted. Migration routes stabilized. Protected regions absorbed displaced animals. Disaster was reduced. Not eliminated. But reduced. For the caretaker, the experience revealed something profound. The original crisis had not merely saved wolves. It had transformed an entire culture. Years ago the kingdom viewed nature as separate from itself. Now people understood the connection. Everything was linked. Forests. Animals. Humans. The future belonged to all of them. One evening, after months of effort, the caretaker returned to the valley where the wolves had gathered. The assembly had ended. Most packs had departed. The valley stood quiet once more. Only a handful of wolves remained. Among them stood an elderly wolf with silver fur. The animal watched her approach. Calm. Wise. Patient. The caretaker stopped several feet away. The wolf's eyes reflected countless years. Countless experiences. And suddenly she understood something. This generation of wolves knew her story. Not because humans told it. Because wolves told it. The realization stole her breath. The first injured wolf she had saved long ago had remembered. That much she knew. But now she saw the larger truth. The memory had continued. Passed from one generation to another. Like a legacy. Like a lesson. Like a promise. Kindness had become part of their history. Just as they had become part of hers. The silver wolf slowly approached. Then lowered its head. A gesture of respect. Not submission. Respect. The caretaker felt tears fill her eyes. After all these years, the connection remained. Stronger than ever. The wolf eventually turned away. Disappearing into the trees. The valley fell silent once more. But this silence felt different. Not final. Not empty. Enduring. The caretaker stood alone beneath the evening sky. Watching sunlight fade beyond the mountains. Reflecting upon everything that had happened. The orphaned pups. The mysteries. The sacrifices. The victories. The years. The lives changed. The future protected. All of it began with a single choice. A door opened during a snowstorm. A frightened pup lifted from the cold. A simple act of compassion. Nothing more. And yet everything. Most people spend their lives wondering whether their actions matter. The caretaker no longer wondered. She knew. Because she had seen the answer. in restored forests, in thriving wolf packs, in a kingdom transformed, in generations that learned to listen. Kindness mattered. It always had. It always would. Far away, wolves howled beneath the stars. The sound rolled across mountains and valleys, across forests and rivers, across a kingdom forever changed. The caretaker listened, smiling softly, because she finally understood what those voices carried. Not warnings, not sorrow, not desperation, gratitude. And that gratitude would continue echoing long after both humans and wolves were gone. An echo carried from one generation to the next. A reminder that compassion is never truly lost. It travels forward. It grows. It survives. Just like the pack. Just like hope. And just like the story that began with a single orphaned pup left in the snow.